I'm Dave Wiesdock, Sage of Creative Scaffolding.
And I'm Jen West, Professional Rebel of Delight.
And this is Shadowcasting. Hey Jen, how are you doing?
Doing great. It's been a good day, lots of great discussion.
That's right. So I was thinking a couple weeks ago, we were talking about things like values, and we've also had a conversation about balance. And there's a theme that has come from both those podcasts that I feel like warrants its own discussion. And I'd like to talk about it today, if you will entertain me.
If it revolves in any way around balance and values, I am all in. Hit me with it.
Awesome. So today I thought I would talk about motivation and discipline.
Wait, motivation and discipline? How does that relate at all?
That's a great question. So I really feel like motivation and discipline, if our audience were to go do a Google search on it right now, there'd be a bazillion hits on it, right? Everyone talks about motivation and discipline. And for those listening, they might be like, okay, maybe I kind of remember Dave and Jen talking about that in a past podcast. But really, motivation and discipline, I'm about to turn it on its head here. Because to me, they're almost, I don't want to say lies, but you know what? Let's make it a little spicy here. Let's call them lies. I don't think
discipline makes my skin crawl. I'm a flowy, adaptable person. Discipline.
Right? And motivation is also something where I can hear a lot of people saying, well, I was motivated yesterday, but I'm not motivated today. Or, it's very fickle. And then they'll go, well, discipline replaces motivation is a lot of what you hear. You start out motivated, and then because you built a habit while you were motivated, you're then disciplined. I've heard that a lot.
Or the discipline creates motivation, because once you get started, then you get in the flow and then you're motivated to do it.
Right. You're riding the momentum. But what happens when, this podcast is going to come out around the holidays, I think, when you've been motivated since January, or let's say you fell off the wagon, because no one ever really sticks with their New Year's resolutions, which hint, you should go listen to our resolution podcast. When you're starting
priority podcast.
Priority podcast. Let's say you started an exercise program in June because you wanted that summer bod. And then September rolls around, it starts getting cold. You're getting out of bed one day less a week. Then it's 2 days less. Then it's 3. And that momentum starts waning. We've all been there. What changed? Because I'm going to bet you're still motivated to lose weight, even if you stop going to the gym. I'm going to bet that if it was just a little warmer, you'd have that discipline that somehow magically disappeared. So what changed, or what maybe wasn't there to begin with, or wasn't being acknowledged to begin with? And I think that's where this topic really comes in, because motivation and discipline for me aren't external drives. It's an internal drive, because it comes from a change in quality. And quality.
You're going to have to dive into that one. What do we mean when we're talking about equality here, Dave?
Yeah. So equality is something that kind of comes from within. It's something that when you recognize and follow and choose to acknowledge your values, something that comes from within yourself, and you move from that space, things happen and things change. And it's evergreen. When you start focusing on equality, it becomes independent of the external circumstances around you, because it is something that happens within you, whether or not you're in a good place to do it, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I kind of think of Ryan Holiday and his Stoic philosophy. When you talk about building a quality, I think of quality of character. It's something that you do because you've built it, and it's just in you now. It's no longer something you have to do. It's a quality of your character.
Yeah. And I think actually I really like that definition of it. And I think to that point too, it's something that, like you just said, I really wanted to emphasize that last part. It is something that is part of your character. And so therefore it is ingrained in who you are. When you move from that quality, you are moving from you are acting in complete alignment with who you are. That's the quality that's there. And motivation and discipline are sort of these, I feel like they're misnomers. Like that's the word that's coming to mind. And I'm not quite sure that that's the right way to describe it, but I feel like they get misunderstood. People see others who are motivated and disciplined and they go, gosh, how do you do that? And the people that are motivated and disciplined, maybe not having that deeper internal self-awareness of that quality, they talk about the actual superficial level of it. Well, I am disciplined because I create a schedule. I am motivated because I do this every day. And they're kind of like defining what they do rather than why or how they do it. And so it misses that kind of secret sauce.
So they're trying to, what is it called when you
Like
engineer?
reverse engineer.
Reverse, I was calling it backward engineering. Yes,
Yeah.
they're trying to reverse engineer who they are.
Yeah.
And so they're just looking at the external things they do that gets all these tasks done. And then other people try to use just those tasks and they're like, I'm not disciplined. I have no motivation. I'm never going to learn this thing. And that's not actually what it is. I see where you're going with this. So basically, all of motivation and discipline is wrong because it's looking from the wrong side.
Yeah, it's looking from the outside.
Yeah.
Whereas true, quote unquote, motivation and discipline comes from the inside.
Okay, so here's where I'm going to go with this, Dave. We normally think about discipline and motivation from a goal oriented standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we pick a goal. Maybe it's lose 50 pounds or get your summer bod or whatever it is. And then we decide the only way to do that is to create a routine and eat a certain amount of food and do this much exercise. And we put together the logical steps that create that outcome. And that's how it's always been presented as motivation and discipline. It's very mental. At least that's what I've always seen with it. It's mental. Motivation and discipline are driven by the necessity to get to the goal. And it's an expectation that's either somebody else puts on us or we put on ourselves. Does this feel familiar to the audience? I don't know. I've never felt motivated by New Year's resolutions. They've never worked for me because there's this have to, this should, this energy that I just don't like. But what I'm hearing from you, Dave, is that's not actually motivation and discipline. So if it's not an external, logical, get to the goal, what is the quality? Where does the quality come from?
So the quality comes from your sense of values, and it's an internal wellspring. Motivation and discipline are externally motivated and externally driven. They are things outside of yourself that you can do, document, track to get to an end goal. But I really feel like motivation and discipline are kind of like the byproducts of you moving from your internal space, your internal value, your internal quality. And the reason I bring that up is because when you start like a New Year's resolution, you're like, I'm going to go to the gym every day. You are motivated because it is a new year. You're writing from the kind of dopamine and serotonin of the holidays. You've just met with family for 3 months in a row, from Thanksgiving to, if you're in the US, to all the certain holidays that come kind of during the winter season, the solstice, Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, etc. And then you start this new year off. And so you're riding high, and maybe that motivation lasts for a week, maybe a month, but eventually it wanes. And some people are able to turn that motivation into a habit, which then turns into a discipline. They still go even if they're not feeling the motivation. But for a large portion of people, once the motivation's gone, the discipline kind of falls by the wayside with it. And it's because in both these instances, there was a drive to go to the gym, and that value was what drove it. And they lost the value along the way. And instead, they were focusing on the end goal, which was to lose the weight, or to go to the gym in this case, to lose the weight probably. And so what happens is in order to find that quality to keep you going as the months go on, if you're making this a priority or a resolution, is to really get to the nitty gritty of what was driving you to be motivated and disciplined in the first place. And one of the ways that I think about this is in my own life, I am a very mental, cerebral person. If I were given the choice of, do you want to spend all day studying philosophy and reading and playing strategy games like chess or Civ or whatever, versus do you want to go on a 6-hour hike today? You better believe I'm doing the former. And it's not because I'm not motivated or disciplined enough to go exercise. It's because my values are a lot more cerebral. I like doing things like strategy and philosophy and reading and studying and those kind of things because that's just where I come from. However, I do have a value of movement and play a little bit, but really I don't like just sitting. And so there's a quality within me that wants to move as well. It's just not as prevalent. That's why I like this, because instead of motivation and discipline becoming an all or nothing thing, when you move from quality, quality becomes scale. And when you move on things that are on a scale, they become a lot less hard to object to. And therefore, you build something more important than motivation and discipline. You build who you want to be. And when you come from that space, which takes time and care, you think things change in a different way that you would expect to come from motivation and discipline, but don't really come from those things.
Yeah, I feel that a lot. As you were talking, I was thinking about things that I actually succeed at when I make a goal versus the things that do fall along the wayside. And often the ones that fail are the ones that I've decided on because of some societal norm or something I think I need to do or am worried about. You talk about spending lots of time and eating with family during the holidays. A great many of us gained some weight over that time because it's all about connecting with family and eating a ton of food. And good food, and it's great. And I don't know about you, but I overindulge, especially on pies and it's
Oh
good
yeah.
time here. But then you get to January and you're like, oh, I've gained 10 pounds in 3 months. And that kicks on that external, I got to drop this or it could go the wrong way. And I've never had success in those because it comes from almost a fear of a slippery slope.
It's a reaction.
Yeah, a reaction. That's a perfect way to put it. The things I have succeeded in, it feels like they don't come into my brain or they're not in my head. They come from somewhere deep inside and bubble into words.
Mm-hmm.
And the motivation comes from that. It's this weird, like boiling inside of me. I can't put it, it's not logical.
Yeah.
And if I let that thing boil and sit, then my brain starts coming up with a plan on how I can do it, not how I'm going to do it and get it done and be successful. How can I? How do I fit this into my world? How does it get smooth and beautiful and actually work and not blow up the rest of my life? It forms from the inside out, and it's crazy powerful. I love that feeling. Things get done, and it's a quality. Like, I want this thing to happen, and it's important to me, and it's going to develop another quality. Like, the outcome doesn't matter at a certain point. It just, I want to develop that quality more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I really like the word boiling because this created this huge analogy in my head as you were bringing this up. And so I hope this makes sense. Really, motivation and discipline is like you wanting to make bowl of pasta. And motivation and discipline is you got the water, you put it in the pot, you heat it up, you throw the water in, and you're just expecting it to cook. It's just step by step by step. And everyone listening goes, well, you don't just throw it in. You got to wait for the water to boil. Then you got to let it cook, and you got to let it cook to a certain temperature, and then you drain it, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that the internal quality is the boiling water. And when you brought up boil, I was like, this is so perfect because when we get wrapped in our motivation and discipline mindsets, which we all are prone to doing. The problem is that we don't wait for the water to boil. We don't wait for that quality to rise up to get the pasta to where we want it to go. And so we sit there a month later and we're like looking at wet pasta that's cold because we didn't build the quality from the start. And I think that that's kind of where this nuance comes in. Motivation and discipline get the water in the bowl or in the pot. It turns the flame on, but the quality that we wait for is the boiling water itself. And that isn't something that comes just from motivation and discipline. It's a combination of everything. But the water is your values. And to get those values boiling and going, you need that inner quality. And that takes time. And it's not something that you can necessarily track on a planner, like habit tracking, right? That's where I think we get confused and turn around a bit, because it's a very nuanced thing. It's not that you can't go to a habit tracker or to do the things that help build discipline and motivation. It's that it's useless if you're not actually boiling the water. And that's where this quality comes in from. It's this boiling water thing. And you always hear the saying, never watch a water boil, or whatever the saying is, never watch a pot boil, or why can't I think of the saying?
I can't think of it either.
But you know what I'm saying. They never watch a water pot boiler.
Please help us, audience. We forgot the quote.
My brain has been so fried lately. Oh, a watch pot never boils.
That's it. Yes.
A watch pot never boils. There it is. So that's the thing, is that if your mind and your focus is always on watching the pot, on watching the motivation and discipline, then you're missing the inner quality, and it's never going to rise up from within you, and you're gonna fall off the wagon. It's a both and. You need the motivation and the discipline, the byproduct, quote unquote, and you need the inner quality, that inner motivation, that inner drive, those inner values to rise up from within you. And when you put those together, that's how you make the pasta. That's how you get to your goal, the weight loss or whatever you're trying to do. And I'm going to take that analogy and kind of talk about a really quick in-life example, which is I wanted to lose weight and I wanted to be more physically active. And I could sign up for a gym for the 50th time. I could go to a class. I could do the things that a motivated and disciplined person would do, but none of those rose up from within. None of those are inner quality. And where the inner quality changed was realizing that I could do something for as short as 2 minutes each day. And that was getting me closer to my goal than trying to spend 1 hour, 1 day a week that I just squeezed in a class for and going to. And the idea is that if, for example, I want to lose weight, but I can only go to the gym once a week, I could also walk 5 minutes a day in my neighborhood and get a better result because I'm building that consistency. And the idea is that I'm coming from within. I have the internal drive to be impeccable, right? One of my values is impeccability, and that means taking care of myself so that I can be present and available to this podcast, to my job, to my family. Being impeccable means doing the things I need to do to take care of me so that I can pour from a full cup and I'm not pouring from an empty cup. And so I can either rely on motivation and discipline, which best practices say to go to the gym 3 days a week or 4 days or 5 days a week, or I can come from the internal quality of impeccability and go and also lean into my value of curiosity and go, how else can I be physically active? How else can I move from this space to get to my goal? And things like I can walk and talk. I can walk every day and talk to a friend or to a colleague or to my parents. And so that way you're kind of building connections and you're interplaying these values. And so there's a lot more reason to do these things. And I feel like I'm rambling now, but it's hard because internal quality is like, it's not a very distinct word. It's a feeling. And so it's something that needs to be described and felt rather than just explained, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is why it tails off of our value podcast, because the values are what start to get that water boiling, which Dave just said. It's really, you start leaning into your values and you start noticing how they work. And you don't have that, I want to lose weight. thing pop into your head. That's not where it starts. It's the values arising, and you're starting to feel better about the world. And something comes up and says, I want to eat differently. And that's all it says. I want to eat differently. Or I want my body to move more. It's not, I want to lose weight. It's not, I want to exercise and get the muscles. It's very gentle and it rises from within based on your values because your body is basically telling you, I feel where you're going. I feel where the values are going. And this is what's going to help us get further along. And if we listen to that inner voice where it's like, I just want to move a little more. If you let it be soft, sometimes it's just like stretching your legs at your desk at first. It's nothing.
Yeah.
And then it goes to, hey, I want to talk to my friend, but I walk around the block and walk my dog while I talk with my friend. It's not exercise. It's not to get the goal to get healthy. The byproduct is the health. The byproduct is the weight loss. Yes, there's an outcome that happens, but that's not what starts the process. The process is the body rising up from within saying, I just want to change something a little, and maybe you just buy a cucumber for some reason one day. Like, ooh, cucumber. I remember liking those. It's not an entire meal prep, change your life, do something different. Just your body said cucumber today. And maybe you crunch on a cucumber that day and it feels good. And then your body gives you something else. Just stretch in the morning. I feel like rolling out of the bed and just making my body long. That's what's happened to me recently is I wake up and I just twist and turn and I'm feeling the stretching of my body and seeing in which ways I can move it. It's not intense. It's not for very long, but I can't help but do it when I wake up. It's no longer a logical thing telling my body what to do. It's me embracing what already wants to come to fruition.
Yeah. And I know that this kind of detracts a little bit from the main theme, but I think it's worth reiterating here too that for motivation and discipline, especially if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you came to this via a quest for growth or self-help, or in some way you're trying to improve your life. And I think that that's another point that gets missed here is that a lot of motivation and discipline is based on do this, not that, do this or this thing. And really what Jen is getting at is this, and I really like how she phrases this. She's so much more eloquent at this than I am, but it's this gentle internal rising. If you're watching a YouTube video and it's like 5 things to do in the morning that make you more productive during the day, yeah, you can implement those 5 things, but how long is that lasting? Maybe a day, maybe a week, probably not longer than that. And the reason for that is because you are trying to imply someone else's internal quality and therefore the way that they cultivate that internal quality to your own life. And unless your values align almost identical with theirs, it's not going to work in the long run because your values are going to start feeling misaligned to a process that isn't geared towards who you are and what your values are. That's where where we were bringing up like walking around the block versus going to the gym. Maybe your internal values are going to the gym, and that's okay. That works for people. But if it's not the thing that works for you, it's probably because your internal quality and your internal values and your internal drive is gearing you towards a different route. And learning where those things come up and how those things come up is the whole essence of really this podcast. It's learning what works for you and finding those things and coming from that space rather than well, Dave and Jen said to do it this way, so I have to do it this way. Because that's never where we're coming from. We're always coming from, here's the possibilities, here's where you can make choice, and here's how to open up and find those things for you. And it's going to be nuanced and weird. And that's where Jen and David are here to kind of help you walk through those little points.
Yeah, we'll hold space for you on those weird qualities. And here's the thing. What I just spoke about was the motivation. That's the motivation rising out of you, where all of a sudden you want a cucumber or you just want to stretch or, the walk around the block. then your system goes, that was nice. And your brain engages it. And that's when the brain says, hey, let's turn this into a discipline.
Yeah.
And it becomes a more strategic, organized, planned thing. And your brain starts to take it into account, because there will be days where you're like, I do not. But your brain goes, but you love it so much after. And now you're disciplined. And it is discipline. And that is the thing that people are selling, is the outcome, the discipline that comes after the whole motivation and internal rising. And this is it's not fast. That's why it's not what's put on the market and sold. The tools are put on the market because the tools you can immediately implement and try to use to find your values and start listening to your values and to slowly let that rising come out of you. That's not happening tomorrow if you listen to this podcast.
Mm-mm.
All the other stuff you have to start getting out of your head. You have to figure out what your limiting beliefs are. You have to start cleaning up your head of what isn't allowed and what is allowed. And then these motivations, this quality is developed. And it takes time. It takes time. You got to get rid of all the other junk that's been put in your system for it to be uncovered and start to come out. And then motivation and discipline happen.
Yes, 100%. I feel like we've really hit on this. I think the other thing I want to bring up real quick about motivation and discipline is that it's something unique to you that comes up. Quality takes time. That's why I really liked the analogy of the water boiling. It takes time for the water to boil. You don't just turn on the heat to high and the water's boiled, right? It takes time. And that's why the saying is a watch pot never boils, because if you just sit there and watch it, it feels like it takes forever. And the idea here is that we aren't saying, and I think I've said this so many ways before too, but it's an act of being. You need to go out and do an experience. That's how the water starts to boil. When you step away from the water and let it do its thing and you're going out, maybe living life is prepping. Like if you're making pasta, again, sticking with this analogy, let's say you're also making pasta primavera. So there's veggies and stuff that you need to cut and prep. While the water is boiling, typically you go and prep the other stuff. It's that same kind of concept. While you are digging into your values and uncovering what they are for you, because this is a process that isn't always talked about, go and do other things. And just like when you're cooking veggies, you always think, oh, I need to go check the water. Oh, I need to go check the water. Is the water boiling, right? It's kind of that same thing. As you go and live life, there's going to start being these notes that come into your brain like, am I living my value? Is this my value? Am I doing the thing that's aligned with where I'm at? And as you start finding those questions, over time, the water starts to boil. Over time, the values start to boil within, because as you're asking those questions and you're going and experiencing them in your life, you start to get an idea of where they're motivating you and taking you.
Yeah, it's a process and you have to open up to it. And things happen before that inner motivation happens. You start to notice it going along. It's a weird thing. Like as it starts to happen, it feels magical.
So for our audience listening, I think today what we'd love to hear from is, are there times where you've struggled with motivation and discipline? Maybe it's with a New Year's resolution. Maybe it's with you realized something during the year that you wanted to make an extra commitment to, and you really were serious about wanting to commit to it, but it didn't work out the way that you thought it would. How has this podcast maybe helped you look at that from a different perspective? In those moments where you weren't necessarily as motivated or disciplined as you thought, go back to those times. Was there a quality missing? Was the water boiling? And if it was, what caused the water to stop boiling? Where did the value get misaligned? Because sometimes that happens too. Sometimes we turn off the heat without realizing it. So where can we reapply and start finding that value again?
Yeah. And conversely, look at when it did work.
Yes.
Where you just had the motivation and you were disciplined and you were on it. What was up with that?
And what were you feeling? We don't, again, a huge part of this, get into the body. What do you feel when you feel that motivation? Where are you feeling it? Are you feeling it in your chest, your gut? Are you feeling it in your hands? Are you ready to go? That fight or flight response. Are you ready to fight? Is this something that's motivating you? The more you can contextualize that experience and get into your senses with it. What do you feel, see, smell, taste, hear? The more likely it is that you're going to be able to bring that up when it's a little bit harder to find. Because the more you can relate to it and the more you can bring it into your world, the easier it'll be for you to find those situations where you can come from your values. And as always, make sure to like our podcast, subscribe wherever you're listening to. Go ahead and give us a share or a shout out.
And until next time.
See ya.